It was a typical Tuesday morning in March when Sundar Pichai, the powerful CEO of Google, found himself in an unusual situation. The sun had just begun to rise over Mountain View, California, casting a golden glow across the sprawling Google campus. Pichai had woken up earlier than usual that day. After spending the weekend jet-lagged from his trip to Asia, where he had attended important business meetings, his body clock was still adjusting to California time. Instead of his normal routine of checking emails and news from bed, Pichai decided to get an early start. He wanted to surprise his team with an unannounced visit to some departments that were working on exciting new projects. This was something he liked to do occasionally, dropping in unexpectedly to see the real work happening when employees weren't preparing for a formal CEO visit. Pichai dressed quickly in his signature simple style, a light blue button-down shirt, dark pants, and comfortable shoes. Unlike most days when his assistant would prepare his schedule and his security team would plan his movements, today he wanted to keep things low-key. He grabbed his phone, car keys, and wallet, then headed to his car in the garage. The drive to the Google headquarters was pleasant with light morning traffic. Pichai used this quiet time to think about the company's future. Google was facing new challenges from competitors and governments around the world, but he remained confident in the team's ability to innovate and adapt. As he drove, Pichai listened to a podcast about artificial intelligence, a field that fascinated him and where Google was investing heavily. The host was discussing the ethical implications of AI development, a topic Pichai had spoken about at several conferences. He found himself nodding along with points that aligned with Google's approach. Arriving at the campus, Pichai parked his car in the regular employee lot rather than his reserved space. He wanted to experience the campus the way most employees did. Walking toward the main building, he smiled at the colorful Google bikes scattered around the pathways and the creative outdoor spaces where employees often gathered for informal meetings. The Google campus was beginning to buzz with early arriving employees. Some were grabbing breakfast at the campus cafeterias, while others were already deep in conversation about their projects. Few noticed the CEO walking among them without his usual entourage. As Pichai approached the main entrance of Building 43, where many of the core teams worked, he mentally prepared for the day ahead. He was excited to see firsthand how the new AI research was progressing and wanted to chat with some engineers about their recent breakthroughs. What Pichai didn't realize was that this ordinary Tuesday was about to become quite extraordinary. In his rush to leave home and his desire to keep things casual, he had made a simple but significant mistake, one that would lead to an awkward and memorable situation that would soon be known throughout the company. Standing tall and confident, Pichai reached the glass doors of the building, nodding politely at people who passed by. Some did double takes, surprised to see the CEO walking alone so early in the morning. Little did they know that this normal morning was about to turn into an unusual story that would spread through Silicon Valley and beyond. A story about what happens when even the most powerful tech CEO in the world forgets something important. As Sundar Pichai reached the main entrance of Building 43, he noticed the security guard watching him from behind the glass doors. The guard was new, a young man with a serious expression who sat straight in his chair, carefully observing everyone who approached. Pichai smiled, expecting the usual recognition that came with being the face of one of the world's most valuable companies. When Pichai pushed the glass door, he was met with resistance. The door was locked, as it should be for security reasons. All employees needed to scan their badges to enter, a basic security measure that protected Google's valuable intellectual property and data. It was at this exact moment that Pichai felt his pockets and realized something was missing. The familiar rectangular shape of his employee badge wasn't there. He checked his right pocket, then his left, then his back pockets. Nothing. He even opened his wallet, thinking he might have slipped it inside. Still nothing. "I must have left it on my dresser," Pichai muttered to himself, remembering how he had placed it there last night after returning from his trip. In his early morning rush, and his desire to have a normal, low-profile day, he had completely forgotten to grab his badge. This had happened once or twice before over the years, but usually his assistant was with him, or security personnel immediately recognized him and let him in without question. Today was different. He was alone and facing a security guard who appeared to be relatively new to the job. Pichai knocked lightly on the glass door, catching the guard's attention. The young man approached cautiously, keeping a professional distance as he opened the door just enough to speak. Good morning, sir. How can I help you? The guard asked in a formal tone. Good morning, Pichai replied with his usual friendly smile. I seem to have forgotten my badge at home this morning. The guard looked at him with a blank expression that didn't show any sign of recognition. I'm sorry, sir, but I'll need to see your Google ID badge before I can let you in. Pichai's smile widened slightly, expecting the moment of recognition to come. I understand completely. Security is important. I'm Sundar Pichai, the CEO. I accidentally left my badge at home today. The guard's expression remained unchanged, though his eyes narrowed slightly. In his training, he had been warned about social engineering. People claiming to be someone important to gain unauthorized access. It was one of the oldest tricks in the security handbook. I'm sorry, Mr. Pichai, but I can't let anyone in without proper identification. It's company policy, the guard stated firmly. Pichai was surprised but also somewhat impressed by the guard's dedication to protocol. After all, he himself had approved the strict security measures after several high-profile breaches at other tech companies. That's completely understandable, Pichai said, maintaining his composure. Is there perhaps a manager or someone else I could speak with? The guard hesitated for a moment before picking up his desk phone. I'll call my supervisor. Please wait outside for a moment, sir. As Pichai stepped back from the door, he noticed several employees approaching the building. They scanned their badges and entered without issue, some of them glancing curiously at him standing outside. A few did double takes, clearly recognizing him but confused about why the CEO of Google was waiting outside his own building. One employee, a woman in her 30s carrying a laptop bag, stopped in her tracks when she saw him. Her eyes widened in recognition, and she looked back and forth between Pichai and the guard, trying to understand the unusual situation unfolding before her. The morning sun was getting stronger now, and Pichai checked his watch. He had an important meeting in 45 minutes. What had started as a spontaneous early morning visit was quickly turning into an unexpected challenge. How would the CEO of Google get into his own office building without his badge? The situation was becoming increasingly awkward by the minute. The security guard supervisor arrived 5 minutes later, a tall woman with short gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She wore a crisp security uniform with the name Martinez on her badge. Her quick, purposeful steps showed she had been in this role for many years. She nodded politely to Pichai as she approached. Good morning, sir. I understand there's an issue with access, she asked, her voice professional but cautious. Yes, I seem to have forgotten my badge at home this morning, Pichai explained again. I'm Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. Martinez studied his face carefully. Unlike the younger guard, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but her expression remained neutral. She had worked at Google for over 8 years and had seen Pichai at various company events. However, she was also aware of something Pichai didn't know. Mr. Pichai, I believe I recognize you. We've implemented a new security protocol just last week, she explained. Under the new rules, absolutely no one is allowed entry without proper credentials, regardless of their position in the company. Pichai looked surprised. A new protocol? I don't recall approving that. It was part of the quarterly security update that your chief security officer implemented after the board meeting last month. Martinez explained. You signed off on the general security improvements, and this was one of the specific measures. Pichai now remembered the thick document he had reviewed and approved. He had trusted his security team to implement appropriate measures without needing to check every detail. This was clearly one of those details. By now, a small crowd of Google employees had gathered nearby, keeping a respectful distance but clearly fascinated by the unusual scene. Some were whispering to each other, and a few had their phones out, though none dared to take photos directly. I understand completely, Pichai said, nodding. Security is indeed a priority, and I'm glad to see the protocols being followed so carefully. One brave employee from the growing crowd stepped forward. He was a young software engineer in his 20s wearing a Google t-shirt and jeans. Excuse me, Ms. Martinez, the engineer said nervously. I can confirm that this is definitely our CEO. I've been at several all-hands meetings with him. Martinez smiled politely at the engineer. Thank you, but the policy is very clear. Even with visual identification from employees, we need either a badge or biometric verification for entry. No exceptions. The situation was becoming increasingly awkward. More employees were arriving for work, and word was spreading quickly. People were stopping to watch, and Pichai could hear his name being whispered among the growing crowd. A woman in business casual attire approached from the parking lot, walking quickly with a concerned expression. It was Sarah Chen, Pichai's executive assistant, who had just received several urgent texts from employees about the situation. Sundar, I just heard what's happening, she called out as she approached. I tried calling your cell but couldn't reach you. Pichai pulled out his phone and noticed several missed calls. He had put it on silent during his drive and forgotten to switch it back. Sarah, good to see you, he said with relief. It seems I left my badge at home this morning. Sarah reached into her bag. I thought that might be the case. When I heard you were here without access, I stopped by your office and picked up your spare badge. She held up a Google ID badge with Pichai's photo on it. Martinez examined the badge carefully, checking the security features built into it. The holographic elements and embedded chip all appeared legitimate. However, she still couldn't simply hand it over. I'm sorry, but under the new protocol, I need to verify that Ms. Chen is authorized to distribute backup credentials, Martinez explained. I'll need to call the Security Operations Center to confirm. Pichai checked his watch again. 20 minutes had passed since he first arrived at the door. His planned surprise visit was turning into something entirely different, an unexpected test of Google's security systems. And so far, those systems were working exactly as they should. While Martinez stepped aside to make her call to the Security Operations Center, the crowd of Google employees continued to grow. What had started as a handful of curious onlookers was now a group of nearly 30 people, all watching their CEO standing outside his own building. The morning sun was climbing higher, and the temperature was rising both literally and figuratively. Pichai maintained his calm exterior, but inside he was beginning to feel uncomfortable. This was not how he had planned to start his day. He had wanted to walk around casually, checking in on projects and chatting with team members. Instead, he had become the center of an unexpected spectacle. I've authorized the badge, Martinez announced as she returned. However, there's one more step in the protocol. We need to verify your identity with a security question. Pichai raised an eyebrow. A security question? That's new. Yes, sir. Part of the enhanced protocol, Martinez explained. Each executive has personal verification questions on file in case of badge issues. Only you would know the answer. Sarah, Pichai's assistant, looked just as surprised. This wasn't in the security brief I received, she said. It was implemented only last week, Martinez replied. The questions were created from information in your personnel files. Pichai nodded. I understand. Please go ahead with the question. Martinez looked down at her tablet. According to our records, what was the name of your first project when you joined Google in 2004? Pichai thought for a moment. It had been over 20 years ago, and he had worked on several projects in his early days. That would be the Google toolbar, he answered confidently. Martinez tapped on her tablet, then frowned slightly. I'm sorry, that doesn't match our records. A murmur went through the crowd. Pichai looked genuinely confused. That's definitely not right, he said firmly. My first project at Google was the Google toolbar. I worked on it for months before moving to Chrome. Martinez checked her tablet again. The system says your first project was something called Project Sunflower. Pichai shook his head. There was never any Project Sunflower. There must be a mistake in your system. By now, the crowd included several long-time Google employees. An older man in glasses stepped forward. Excuse me, but I've been here since 2003, and I can confirm Mr. Pichai's first project was indeed the toolbar. I worked with him on it. The situation was getting more complicated. Martinez looked uncertain for the first time. I need to check with my superiors about this discrepancy. As she stepped away again, Pichai turned to Sarah. Can you call Greg? He should be able to sort this out. Greg Rakolsky was Google's chief security officer, the person who had implemented the new protocols. Sarah was already dialing. I'm trying, but he's in a meeting. I've sent an urgent message. A younger employee near the front of the crowd suddenly raised her hand. Mr. Pichai, if I may, I work in the security department. This sounds like it might be related to the test scenarios we were asked to program into the system last week. Pichai turned to her with interest. Test scenarios? Yes, sir. We were asked to create false verification questions for several executives as part of a security drill. It was supposed to be implemented next week, not now. She looked nervously at Martinez, who was returning from her call. Martinez overheard the last part of the conversation and her eyes widened. She quickly checked something else on her tablet. "Oh no," she said quietly. "What is it?" Pichai asked. "It appears there's been a scheduling error," Martinez admitted. "The test protocols were activated early. They weren't supposed to go live until next Monday's security drill." The crowd began to murmur more loudly. Some people were trying to hide their smiles, while others looked embarrassed for everyone involved. Pichai, however, didn't show frustration. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "So, to be clear, I'm being denied entry to my own building because a security test was accidentally implemented a week early," he asked calmly. Martinez straightened her shoulders. "Yes, sir, that appears to be the case. I deeply apologize for the confusion." What happened next would be retold in Google's hallways for years to come. Instead of becoming angry or pulling rank, Sundar Pichai did something unexpected. "Well, this is certainly not how I expected my morning to go," Pichai said with a small smile, looking at the gathered crowd. His calm reaction surprised many employees who had been bracing for an executive meltdown. Instead of anger, Pichai seemed almost amused by the situation. By now, word of the CEO's predicament had spread across the Google campus like wildfire. Employees from nearby buildings were walking over to witness the unusual scene. What had started as a small group of curious onlookers was now a crowd of over 60 people, and more were arriving every minute. Among the newcomers was Jen Wom, the vice president of communications, who pushed her way through the crowd with a concerned expression. She had received multiple text messages about the situation and had rushed over from another building. "Sundar, I just heard what's happening. This is a PR nightmare waiting to happen," she whispered when she reached him. "Someone's bound to post about this on social media." Pichai glanced around at the crowd, noticing several employees with phones in hand, though none were openly taking photos or videos yet. The respect for company policy about not sharing internal events was still holding, but for how long? "Let's not overreact, Jen," he said quietly. "It's just a procedural mix-up." Meanwhile, Martinez was having an intense conversation on her phone, occasionally glancing nervously at Pichai. The under-security guard looked completely overwhelmed by the situation, clearly not having expected to deny the CEO entry on his regular Tuesday shift. Sarah, Pichai's assistant, was also on her phone, frantically messaging the chief security officer's team. "They're trying to reach Greg, but he's in an off-site meeting with government officials about data privacy. His deputy is looking into overriding the system now." A tall man in a Google developer t-shirt approached Pichai cautiously. "Excuse me, sir, I'm Dade from the Android team. Would you like to use my office in Building 41 while this gets sorted out? It has a nice view of the campus, and I could bring you coffee." Before Pichai could respond, another employee stepped forward. "Or you could use our conference room in Building 44. It's closer and more private." Suddenly, multiple employees were offering their spaces, badges, and assistance. The awkward situation was quickly turning into a demonstration of the Google community rallying around their leader. Pichai raised his hands gently. "Thank you all for your kind offers, but I think I'll wait right here until we resolve this properly." Just then, a group of international visitors rounded the corner with their tour guide. They were potential business partners from Japan who had come for a scheduled campus tour. They stopped in their tracks when they saw the large crowd gathered outside the main entrance. The tour guide, a young woman named Priya, recognized Pichai immediately and froze mid-sentence. The Japanese visitors followed her gaze, and several of them pointed excitedly when they recognized the CEO. "Is that Sundar Pichai?" one of them asked loudly in accented English. The crowd parted slightly as the visitors approached, many of them now taking photos despite Priya's gentle reminders about campus photography policies. "Mr. Pichai, what an honor," the lead visitor said, bowing slightly. "We were hoping to meet you during our tour. We didn't expect it to be like this." Pichai smiled professionally and bowed in return. "Welcome to Google. I hope you're enjoying your visit so far. As you can see, we take our security very seriously here." The visitors laughed, assuming he was making a joke. Priya looked mortified as she tried to explain the situation in hushed tones to the visitors. Meanwhile, Martinez returned from her call, looking both relieved and embarrassed. Mr. Pichai, I've received authorization to grant you temporary access while we sort out the system issue. However, protocol requires that you be escorted by security personnel at all times until your proper credentials are verified. The crowd watched with fascination as the most powerful person at Google was assigned a security escort like a first-day visitor. Some employees were quietly taking bets on how Pichai would react to this final indignity. What they didn't expect was for Pichai to break into a genuine laugh. "Well," he said, checking his watch, "this has been the most interesting 40 minutes of my week so far. Shall we continue this adventure inside?" As Martinez began to escort Pichai into the building, the CEO made a surprising decision. He stopped at the entrance and turned to face the gathered crowd of employees, visitors, and security personnel. "Before we go inside, I'd like to say something," Pichai announced in a clear voice that carried across the now silent crowd. Everyone leaned in slightly, phones lowered out of respect, as they waited to hear what their CEO would say about the morning's embarrassing events. "What happened here today was actually quite valuable," Pichai began, his tone thoughtful rather than angry. "Our security team was doing exactly what they should do, following protocol and protecting our company, regardless of who was trying to enter." The security guards, who had been looking nervous, straightened their postures slightly. Martinez gave a small nod of appreciation, though her face still showed concern about the situation. "In my 17 years at Google, I've always believed that good security isn't about convenience. It's about consistency," Pichai continued. "Today, I experienced firsthand how our systems work when tested, and despite the personal inconvenience, I'm actually quite pleased." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. This was not the reaction anyone had expected. "Martinez," Pichai said, turning to the supervisor, "I want to commend you and your team for maintaining our protocols even when faced with an uncomfortable situation. That's exactly what we need at Google." Martinez's expression changed from worry to surprise, and then to pride. "Thank you, sir. We were just doing our job." "That's precisely my point," Pichai responded warmly. "And you did it well." Pichai then turned to the young security guard who had first stopped him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kevin Ramirez, sir," the guard answered nervously. "It's my 3rd week here." "Well, Kevin, I'd like to thank you personally," Pichai said, extending his hand. "Your willingness to enforce rules equally, regardless of someone's title or position, is exactly the kind of integrity we value at Google." Kevin shook Pichai's hand, looking both embarrassed and proud as the crowd broke into spontaneous applause. Jen Wong, the VP of Communications who had been worried about the PR implications, was now looking at the scene with new eyes. She quickly stepped beside Pichai and whispered, "This is actually a fantastic story about our security culture. With your permission, I'd like to share this internally." Pichai nodded. "I think that's a great idea, but first, let's make sure our visitors are taken care of." He turned to the Japanese delegation who were watching with fascination. "I'd like to personally invite you to join me for coffee once I've properly signed in. I believe we have much to discuss about security in the digital age." The lead visitor smiled broadly. "We would be honored, Mr. Pichai." As Pichai finally entered the building, properly escorted by Martinez, employees began dispersing back to their work areas. But the conversations that started that morning would continue throughout the day and beyond. The story of how the CEO was denied entry and his unexpected reaction spread quickly through email, chat groups, and lunch conversations. Sarah, who had been stressed throughout the ordeal, finally relaxed as they walked toward Pichai's office. "That was quite a morning. I've already arranged for your spare badge to be properly registered in the system." Pichai smiled as they walked past teams of engineers and designers, many of whom looked up with new respect as he passed by. "You know, Sarah, I came in early today hoping to see the real Google at work. I think I got exactly what I wanted, just not in the way I expected." They reached his office door, where Martinez used her master key to let them in. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked. "Yes," Pichai replied thoughtfully. "Please schedule a meeting with the security team for tomorrow. I think we have some valuable learnings to discuss and some well-deserved recognition to give." By late afternoon, the morning's incident had transformed from an awkward situation into something much more significant. After his meetings and the impromptu coffee session with the Japanese visitors, Pichai returned to his office and sat down at his computer. He looked out of his window at the Google campus, watching employees moving between buildings, riding colorful Google bikes, and gathering in outdoor meeting spaces. The security mix-up had given him an unexpected opportunity to reflect on company culture and values. After thinking for several minutes, he began typing an email to all Google employees worldwide, something he did only for truly important communications. At precisely 4:30 p.m., every Google employee's inbox pinged with a new message from the CEO. The subject line read, "What I learned when I couldn't get into work today." Throughout the Google offices around the world, employees stopped what they were doing to read the unexpected message. Dear Googlers, by now, many of you may have heard about my adventure this morning when I tried to enter our Mountain View campus without my badge. For those who haven't, here's what happened. I was denied entry to our building because I didn't have proper identification, and our security team followed protocol exactly as they should have. Some might expect me to be upset about this experience. I wasn't. In fact, it was one of the proudest moments I've had as CEO of this company. Today, I witnessed firsthand what happens when a company truly lives by its principles. Our security team, particularly Officer Martinez and Officer Ramirez, demonstrated that at Google, our rules apply equally to everyone, from new hires to the CEO. This may seem like a small thing, but it represents something much bigger: our commitment to integrity in everything we do. In a world where many organizations have one set of rules for leaders and another for everyone else, I'm proud that Google is different. I've always believed that the strongest security isn't about advanced technology, although we certainly have that. It's about people who are willing to do the right thing, even when it's uncomfortable. Today, I saw that principle in action. To every member of our security team around the world, thank you for protecting our people, our buildings, and our innovations, no matter who is trying to enter the door. And to all Googlers, let this be a reminder that our culture of security depends on each of us following proper protocols, even when it seems unnecessary or inconvenient. No exceptions, no shortcuts. I'm carrying my badge with me right now, and I promise I won't forget it again anytime soon. But if I do, I expect to be waiting outside just like anyone else. Sundar. The email spread like wildfire. Within minutes, employees were sharing and discussing it in offices from Tokyo to Toronto. In the Mountain View security office, Martinez printed out a copy and pinned it to the bulletin board as her team gathered around, reading with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Kevin Ramirez, the young security guard who had first stopped Pichai, became something of a celebrity. Colleagues from other departments stopped by the security desk to meet the guy who denied the CEO entry. Rather than being embarrassed, Kevin now told the story with pride, emphasizing how Pichai had thanked him for doing his job correctly. In the executive wing, Sarah received dozens of messages from other executive assistants, all commenting on the email and Pichai's handling of the situation. The chief security officer, who had finally returned from his off-site meeting, called Pichai directly to apologize for the system error, but found himself instead receiving praise for building such a strong security culture. By evening, the story had spread beyond Google's walls. While no official press statement was issued, employees' social media accounts buzzed with pride about their CEO's reaction. Several technology news sites picked up the story, with headlines like "Google's CEO shows what true leadership looks like after being denied entry to his own office." What had started as an embarrassing mistake had transformed into a powerful statement about company culture. As Pichai left the office that evening, badge prominently displayed on his shirt, he noticed something different. Employees throughout the building were suddenly more conscious about wearing their own badges properly. The smallest actions of a leader, he reflected, often sent the loudest messages. 1 month after the badge incident, Sundar Pichai stood on stage at Google's quarterly all-hands meeting. The large auditorium was packed with employees, while thousands more watched the live stream from offices around the world. This regular meeting, known as TGIF, Thank God It's Friday, was where important company updates were shared. After discussing quarterly results and upcoming product launches, Pichai paused and smiled. Before we move to Q&A, I want to share something interesting that's happened since my adventure with the security team last month. A wave of knowing laughter spread through the audience. The story had become part of Google's cultural folklore. Our security team recently shared some fascinating numbers with me, Pichai continued. In the 4 weeks since the CEO lockout incident, as people are calling it, badge compliance across all Google offices worldwide has increased by 97%. That's the highest rate in our company's history. Slides appeared on the giant screen behind him, showing the dramatic improvement in security metrics. A bar graph highlighted how tailgating incidents, when people follow others through doors without scanning their own badges, had decreased by 74%. But something even more important has happened, Pichai said, his voice growing thoughtful. We've seen a cultural shift that goes beyond security protocols. He clicked to the next slide, which showed results from the company's internal pulse survey. One question had shown a remarkable change. I believe rules at Google apply equally to everyone regardless of their position. Agreement with this statement had jumped 23 percentage points in just 1 month. This tells me something powerful about leadership, Pichai explained. When we as leaders visibly follow the same rules we expect others to follow, it builds trust and strengthens our culture. The auditorium was now completely silent as employees listened intently. To recognize this shift, I'm excited to announce a new annual award, the Security Excellence Award. This will recognize teams and individuals who go above and beyond to protect Google, even when it's uncomfortable or challenging. Pichai gestured to the side of the stage, where Martinez and Kevin Ramirez, the security officers from that memorable morning, were invited to join him. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers as the surprise security officers walked on stage. These two colleagues reminded us all of something important, Pichai said as he handed them the first awards. At Google, our values aren't just words on a wall. They're actions we take every day, especially when no one is looking, or when everyone is looking. After the ceremony, as people mingled during the reception, the story of the badge incident came up in countless conversations. But now it had evolved from an amusing anecdote into something more meaningful, a tangible example of Google's values in action. In the following weeks, the effects continued to spread. Other tech companies in Silicon Valley heard about Google's security transformation and began examining their own practices. Several CEOs privately contacted Pichai, asking how they could create similar cultural shifts in their organizations. 6 months later, when a new class of Google employees attended their orientation, the badge story was included in their training materials as a case study in security culture and leadership. The instructors would share how a simple forgotten badge had led to meaningful changes throughout the company. For Pichai, the incident had provided an unexpected but valuable leadership lesson. Sometimes the most powerful messages came not from planned speeches or official policies, but from small, authentic moments that demonstrated what really mattered. As he walked through the Google campus now, Pichai always made a point of visibly scanning his badge at every door, no matter who was watching. He knew that as a leader, his actions spoke much louder than his words. And thanks to 2 security officers who had simply done their jobs correctly, Google had become a stronger company than before. The end.